Please help me welcome Mr. Frank Wolf.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the panelists too. And I'm going to cut my remarks short, so I don't tell you what's going on because you know what's going on. But what I'm going to say is why all of this ought to be involved. And then lastly, perhaps the most important thing, what we can do, not an op-ed piece or something, what we can do to make a difference. I have been to Syria. I have been to Iraq. I have been to Egypt. I was the first member of Congress to go to Iraq after the war broke out, and I've been back many, many times and have kept in touch with the people of the region. The people and the places in the Middle East are the subject of the Bible. Why are the religious leaders not speaking about this? In Syria, where I've been, the Apostle Paul, who wrote 13 books from the New Testament, met Jesus. He met Jesus on the road to Damascus. The house that Ananias went, where Paul met, I have been to that house. Is that house now going to be taken over by a terrorist group? The Christian community in Syria has roots dating back to the first century. So how can you not say, if you're a person of faith, how can you not say you don't care about Syria? In Egypt, as told in Matthew 2, Jesus and Mary and Joseph, they fled to Egypt. Jesus went to Egypt. Joseph was sold into slavery and taken to Egypt, where he eventually saved his family. Moses, have you ever heard of Moses? If you're a religious leader, have you ever heard of Moses? Moses was born in Egypt and led the Israelites out of the Egyptian slavery. So how? I don't understand this. How can we not say that we're interested in Egypt, in Iraq? With the exception of Israel, the Bible refers more to the cities and the regions and the ancient nations of Iraq more than any other country of the world. The patriarch Abraham came from Ur, a city in Iraq now called Nasiriyah, where I went when the war broke out. We went to Nasiriyah. We saw the site there. Abraham came from Iraq. The spiritual revival, as told in the book of Jonah, occurred where? It occurred in Nineveh, where ISIS blew up the tomb. They blew up the tomb. I've been to Mosul. Blew up the tomb of Jonah. And the world almost didn't say very, very much in Mosul. The events of the book of Daniel took place in Iraq. So how? I just don't understand how a government official or how a religious leader cannot speak out and be involved with regard to what's taking place in Iraq. Now, over the span of a few decades, the Middle East, with the exception of Israel, has virtually, as we heard from Hillary, who I appreciate Hillary's good work, has emptied of the vibrant Jewish communities. The Christian community is seeing the decline in the cradle of Christianity. If the Middle East is emptied, as it is being, don't pretend it's not taking place, as it is being, there will be grave geopolitical, and I would say, quite frankly, spiritual implications. We have seen the Yazidi community, and God bless the Yazidi community. They've been devastated. There are 25, 26, 2,700 women and girls who have been taken by ISIS, and many of them, they know where they are. I've been to Mount Sinjar. I saw the spot where they came. I've been to Sinjar City. I've been to the camps. I've been to the camp where the Yazidis were, and there was an old man. He said, "Do I have to stay here?" I went back. I told my wife, I couldn't imagine, Carol, living in that camp. I couldn't imagine it. So how can we not say that we don't care about the Yazidis? We've seen how bad things are for religious minorities in these countries. And for those who care, I would say to this administration, for those who care about our national security, we also need to consider the threats coming from this region. So the question is, why should we be involved? Why should this be a priority? Not just a kind of a nasty thought, but why should this not be a priority for Secretary Rubio and the State Department and the Trump administration? And now what can be done? In Ecclesiastes 4:1, I know you all know the verse. It's one of my favorite ones from the Bible because you can feel the pain. It said, again I looked. I saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of the oppressors, and they have no comforter. In Luke 4, Jesus said that God sent him to, quote, proclaim freedom for the prisoners and to release the oppressed. Are we, I just can't understand it when I look at the world. Are we not in the West now burdened by the injustice and the religious persecution in the Middle East? It's a biblical mandate for all the religious leaders. I mean, this is a biblical mandate. Here are some ideas. Not just to talk about, I didn't come here to talk about it. I threw the beginning of the speech away. I didn't talk about just how bad it is, but here are some ideas to consider that I believe, in my heart of hearts, I believe will help Christians and other religious minorities and will help fight anti-Semitism. One, working together. And I want to, Lindsay, I appreciate it. I think it's good that you have all the groups together. There are some other groups out there that I think you should bring in because there's all for one and one for all. So working together is important. I hope you will continue this cooperation, especially when you consider the lobbyists that are working for some of these governments and spending a lot of money to work against the very interest of what you're saying, and to work against, quite frankly, what it says in the Bible, to work against, again, what Jesus said. So I believe you should expand your coalition to include other organizations and other groups, and they're out there to share your concerns. Two, listen carefully on this. This should be done as a group. You should ask for a meeting as a group, not just one, not just two, as a group. You should ask for a meeting with Secretary Rubio to express your concerns. Secretary Rubio has always been supportive of international religious freedom. So this must be a priority for Secretary Rubio. Ask him. Say, Mr. Secretary, can you give me the name of a person on your staff that can be our contact, who we can call when we have a problem, and who through we can pass information on to you? So first, you ought to ask as a coalition. You ought to ask for a meeting, and Rubio is a good guy. You should ask for a meeting, not just one little group here, a coalition to meet with Secretary Rubio. Three, and nothing I'm saying here is impossible. You should ask for a meeting with President Trump as a coalition and ask him to make this a priority. Say, Mr. President, would you not make this a priority with regard to what's taken to the persecuted church in the Middle East? And then when you get there, and you will get there, ask him to say, what member of your staff can we contact when we have a problem? You should also meet with House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune. They're both good men. They're both good men. They're both men of faith. I know them both. You should meet with them. Not just one group, but as a coalition, come together and meet with them. As well, you should meet with the chairman of the House and Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They're both good guys. They're both good guys. Meet with them. Ask. And then, I don't know, there used to be a caucus in the House that advocated for Christians and other minorities in the Middle East. I don't know if the caucus is is active. Is it active? But if it should be reinvigorated. And members of Congress, bipartisan, should be encouraged to join it. And there should be congressional delegations. There should be congressional delegations going to Syria, gone to Egypt, gone to Iraq, and not wasting all your time in the American embassy going out and talking to the people, going into the churches, meeting with the people, listening to them, hearing their pain, because if a congressman who does that comes back and has a passion to deal with this problem. Next, I suggest that you have a delegation of your group to travel to Rome to meet with Pope Leo. Pope Leo is a good guy. I'm sure, I know that Pope Leo cares about what happens in the Middle East, the cradle of Christianity. I just read a book. I urge you to get the book if you can. There's a book by a professor at Grove City College. His name was Paul Kengor, Kengor. It's about how President Reagan and Pope John Paul worked together to defeat communism. Communism was defeated not by the Congress. Congress was defeated. Communism was defeated by Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul. They met. Read Kengor's book. They met over and over and over and over. When Ronald Reagan was president, Ronald Reagan also always spoke out about persecution. There's a story, and I may not have it actually exactly right, but the Russian ambassador came in one day to the American Secretary of State, George Shultz, and said, Secretary Shultz, every time I talk to the president, the first thing he talks about is human rights and religious freedom. And George Shultz says, well, that's amazing, because the first thing whenever I meet with the president, the first thing he talks about is human rights and religious freedom. Ronald Reagan always spoke out, and I think our leaders need to speak out on these issues. Next, you should send a letter, and this has to be done. You should send a letter to all the religious leaders imploring them to speak out for Christians and other minorities in the Middle East and to fight anti-Semitism. The Protestant Church and the Catholic Church almost needs a Dietrich Bonhoeffer movement. You need to send a letter to all of them and asking them to speak out. The church in the West must be involved. I personally am speaking for myself. I've been disappointed in the lack of interest and action by the church in the West. During the Civil Rights Movement, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King expressed it well. Dr. King said, and I quote Dr. King, he said, in deep disappointment, I have wept over the laxity of the church. Dr. King went on to say, so often the contemporary church is a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. Number 7. After the international religious freedom legislation passed, there was a successful effort to have an international religious freedom Sunday in every church. There was actually a group formed out in Chicago somewhere, and they would have a service where they would bring in somebody from a persecuted country, maybe somebody from Sudan and somebody from China, or somebody from wherever, and they would tell what was going on. This has to be started again. The churches need to bring somebody in that understands what is taking place in just not another country, but in the cradle of Christianity. Also, as a group, you should be involved in who the ambassadors are in Syria and in Egypt and in Iraq. I remember once I was in Iraq, I was in Syria, Egypt, and I was talking to the Coptic community, and they said, Mr. Wolf, I don't feel comfortable going to the American embassy. I didn't understand it because they said, we don't think the American embassy, and I'm not trying to tie down the day so you can find out who the ambassador was. They did not feel comfortable. Yet I remember in 1980 when we used to go to Romania the American embassy was an island of freedom. Whenever the Christian community got to the American embassy, they felt like they were loved, they were cared. The American embassy in every country, in Iraq, in Egypt, in Syria, and you should be involved in who the next ambassador is going to be, should always, frankly, I can't understand why it wouldn't be, should always be an island of freedom. So anybody who's concerned about this issue can get to there, they feel that they are in an island of freedom. Last month, and I urge you to do this, don't be afraid. Last month, there was an article in the Free Press entitled, "How Qatar Bought America." Among other alarming facts, it states that Qatar is the largest foreign funder of U.S. colleges and universities in the world, $6.3 billion. $6.3 billion from Qatar? Qatar should be banned. There should be legislation in Congress. Qatar should be banned from giving money to American universities and think tanks. Qatar is spreading hate. They're spreading the seeds of anti-Semitism. And we are seeing the results on American college campuses. And it is spreading in our society at large. 3 examples we all know about. The burning of Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro's house, my home state where I come from in Pennsylvania. They burned his house because it was Jewish. We saw what happened at the Capitol Museum, the Jewish Museum, not very far from here. 2 people were killed. And we saw the attack in Boulder, Colorado a few months ago. A look at history, and I'm going to be very controversial perhaps, but a look at history tells us how this happens. American involvement in World War II, which my dad fought in, began in 1941. The war in Europe against the Nazis began in 1939. But the seeds of virulent anti-Semitism, which led to the Holocaust, were sown in the early 1930s by the Nazis. They were sown in 1931, 1932, 1933, 1934, 1935, 1936, 1937, 1938, and the world stood by. The world stood by and did, frankly, nothing. On September 16, 2014, a few months before I left Congress, I made a statement for the Congressional Record about the rise of anti-Semitism around the world. I'm alarmed how many of the things I spoke about have actually worsened. A phrase, and I know you'll understand this and you all have heard it, a phrase not often heard outside the majority Muslim world: first the Saudi people, then the Sunni people. The Saudi people are, of course, the Jews, and we see other communities throughout Syria, Egypt, and Iraq have been decimated. I remember my last trip to Egypt. I was there, it was 2014. I asked to meet with a leader of the Jewish community. I think her name was Esther. She had a store. And I went out to her that one night we met, and I said, "How many Jewish people are left in Egypt?" She said, "Mr. Wolf, I think 24, 25. And she said, "Mr. Wolf, we're all old." I don't know the exact number. Maybe Hillary had it again. I think there are 2 or 3 Jewish people left. And yet, when you read the USEF report, there's still anti-Semitism in the textbooks in Egypt. A similar fate is happening to the Christian communities, the Sunni people in these lands. In Iraq, the remaining Christian population is being squeezed, as Camilla said, from its ancestral homelands in Nineveh and the surrounding areas. The Yazidi community, God bless them, they're being treated poorly. They have no power, and many are leaving. Some are leaving to America. Some in Omaha, Nebraska. I mean, the Yazidi community ought to exercise its effort out in Omaha and the rest, but it's spreading. They're leaving. I would leave. My goodness, when have you been in the Yazidi camp and you can see, I told you the story about the old man, and I went home, I told my wife, I just couldn't imagine me living in that. So we see what's happened. In Egypt, and you know better, so we're not going to go into detail, the Coptic Christians being persecuted. And you know what's happening to many of the young women. You had a conference the other day. It's painful to see and hear, and many are leaving in droves. Now in Northern Virginia, there are 4 Coptic Christian community churches. In Syria, the Christian population has dramatically dropped. And other religious minorities, the Druze and the Alawites, are being threatened. And as one of the speakers said, I think the moderator, the new government leader has strong ties to terrorism. Some of his people from Idlib are now becoming in the military and in parts of the government. So we see the people in the cradle of Christianity being persecuted and forced out, and we see it every day. Just so you know, from a historical point of view, there are 2 quotes which I have learned and led and talked about that resonate with us today. In the 18th century, British parliamentarian, God bless him, William Wilberforce, said this to his fellow countrymen about the evils of the slave trade. Wilberforce said, "You may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again you do not know." Nobody in Congress can say they do not know. Nobody in the Trump administration can say they do not know. Nobody in the State Department can say they do not know. Nobody in the church, if you read the Washington Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, you can't say you don't. You can't say you don't know. The second quote is from a friend of German Lutheran pastor and anti-Nazi dissident, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, "Silence in the face of evil is evil itself." If you see something going on and you don't say anything, how do you do? It's evil not to speak. And then he went on to say, not to speak is to speak. If you don't say anything, you're actually saying anything. And then he said, not to act is to act. So I'm going to end on this last comment. Years ago, there was a slogan popular among Christian young people. It said, "What would Jesus do?" WWJD. You may remember it. There were bracelets in my church. There were bracelets, and they were T-shirts. Obviously, things in the modern world are dramatically different than in Jesus' days. Then there was no internet. There was no cell phone. There was no social media. There are no jet planes to travel. So really, what we should consider and add into that WWJD is, what would Jesus do if he were me today? I believe Jesus would be helping the persecuted Christians and other religious minorities in the Middle East and opposing the hate of anti-Semitism. The Trump administration should be doing the same. The State Department should be doing the same. The Congress should be doing the same. The church should be doing the same. And we all should be doing the same. Thank you very much.